Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss best practices with IT modernization strategies in the federal government. With me on today's show are Rocky Campione, Chief Information Officer, Department of Energy; Perian Ashmore, Deputy Chief Information Officer with Health and Human Services; Ralph Havens, President, InfoBlocks Federal; Earl Underwood, Director of Systems and Integration Office, Department of State; Nicholas Speece, Chief Federal Technologist with Snowflake; and Habib Harani, Team Lead Federal Solutions Engineer with Okta. Well, we're talking about IT modernization. We have three very large departments that are well on their way with IT modernization and transformation, and three partners that are helping integrate, enable all those capabilities. Rocky, we're going to start with you and talk about what's going on over at Department of Energy. You've been over there a few months.
Yeah, about 8 months now. It's still great to be there. It's still, I think, one of the best places to work in government. We have great people doing great things. I am continually impressed by the innovations that our national labs and our sites and facilities around the complex continue to bring to bear to the American people and help solve our nation's largest problems. But I want to talk about modernization. We've got a great modernization story right now. Using the Technology Modernization Fund, so TMF, we started about a year ago in our path to getting all of our on-premises email up to the cloud. So over the past year, we've been moving along that line. We're moving about 20,000 people. We've already paid back some of our money. So not only have we received the money, we've started the paybacks, which we're really excited about.
That's very important to OMB.
It is.
Right.
It's important to us too.
Sure,
it's
of course.
American people's money, and we need to make sure that when they make an investment, that they're getting a return on their investment. But we are successfully migrating not just our email, but we're also moving out of our data centers, which also helps save help save some money and gives us some more flexibilities. So we're moving a large portion of our on-premises environment into both AWS, Azure, and looking at other commercial clouds available. And we've been doing that over the last year. And we're really excited about that. And I'm most excited. I keep moving the date on my folks. You know, I'd like to be out of our data centers, our main data centers, by the end of this fiscal year, because when we do that, I think we have more redundancy. We're more resilient because our data centers are getting older. So moving out of that data center and on the on-premises environment up into those cloud environments
makes a lot of sense. How many data centers are we talking about?
Well, we have two major data centers
Right.
that we have on the federal space. We have three. One's kind of a cold backup, but we have two major data centers, and we're moving out of those first. Across the complex, it's a little bit more difficult because some of our data centers house the largest computers in the world or the fastest computers in the world. We'll likely not get rid of those data centers.
Sure.
But when we talk about our major federal data centers, we have two, and we will always have a small footprint, but we can drastically reduce that footprint.
And when you make these transformations, functionality a lot of times goes up, reliability. It's not just a cost thing, there's all kinds of capability.
Absolutely.
HHS, I know you all are on a journey as well. Very large department with lots of different operating components, a lot of moving parts going on over there.
That's true.
Tell us what's happening on your IT modernization journey.
Thanks, Luke. So at HHS, a lot of recent victories. The biggest one is use of our recurrent neural network, HHS Accelerate. What we've done just recently is we've actually used that recurrent neural network to optimize our acquisition processes. So with a recent contract award, reading more than in this neural network, we consume more than the number of pages in the Library of Congress of old acquisition data, and we're able to save and return to the mission $33 million just by purchasing smarter.
Wow.
And that's what we're doing. And through the leadership of HHS, it's about returning money to the mission, returning days to the mission. So another effort that's gotten a lot of notoriety recently is a project that we've worked with our Chief Human Capital Officer on, which is the idea of sharing certificates of eligibility within the department. By using that process, we've created databases for use by our managers of over 30,000 resumes. We're able to shave over 70 days off the hiring process. So again, returning 70 days to the mission, as important as what we do to protect the health and well-being of the American people, is imperative. So that's been the focus of our work, is really finding ways to return days and dollars to the mission.
That's awesome, and now more than ever, right?
Now more than
a
ever.
Perfect
Absolutely.
example of where the good folks at HHS, come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and are off and running and making sure we keep this country safe. Ralph, how about at InfoBlocks? There's a lot of modernization going on, a lot of transformation. And then a whole bunch of technology that's in place, a lot of partners to make that happen, right? You all are right smack in the middle of that. Tell us what's going on and what you're seeing across the community in regards to the different IT modernization activities.
Thank you, Luke. So, transformation that I've seen in the last 3-5 years is InfoBlocks has provided products and services to automate core network services. What's that? DNS, DHCP, and IP address management. Not very sexy. And until there was a broader realization that DNS is inherently open and unsecure, it was just not a sexy thing. It didn't have any priority, didn't have any focus. The changes that have occurred over the last 3 to 5 years have been a more proactive approach to scaling and securing and automating those core network services. Now agencies with InfoBlocks are looking at a proactive, how do I scale for the future? How do I scale to secure? How do I look at data center consolidation and take an active approach in doing that versus a reactive approach?
Yeah, and as we start to move out of these data centers, was described by Rocky, you're getting into these environments where the network becomes such a core piece of enabling this modernization journey, and the different elements inside of those networks become a real important part of gluing all this together. Earl, I know there's a whole bunch of activity going on at State. Once again, another very complex environment. When we talk about global, you guys, I think, have the mastery of that, right? You're in a lot of different countries, et cetera. Whole bunch of activity going on at State. Tell us about the modernization journey you're on.
All right, good afternoon, Luke. So first, through the Data Center Optimization Initiative, we've been looking at how we can consolidate our data centers and make them more capable. We are migrating a lot of stuff to the cloud, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But really, the first place we had to look at is we had a lease facility that was costing us a lot of money. So we took an approach of using modular data centers, which we see a lot of the big commercial cloud providers using, to modernize our data centers without having to do brick and mortar, save a lot of money, get the people out of the data center, keep just the equipment there. So we have successfully completed that, and we have a modular data center that is up and running. On top of that, within that same effort, we looked at the equipment that we were buying and using within the data centers. Historically, we were buying servers, switches, networks, storage, and putting it together ourselves. We decided to go down a path of buying a converged stack that gives you all of that at once and allows you to then maintain a lot more consistently your environment. Within that converged stack, we also deployed at the enterprise level high availability and disaster recovery, so that the system owners don't have to worry so much about how they're going to ensure availability of their systems or disaster recovery in case of a failure. We're doing that at the enterprise level. They can focus on their system, and then we automatically take care of that for them. We also had to modernize our networks. As we migrated more and more information to the cloud, our network, especially our WANs going overseas to our posts, were not fully capable of handling all of the backhaul of traffic. So we spent the last 2 years optimizing our core infrastructure and improving the ISP connections to the post. And then finally, one of the biggest challenges we've had is around the procurement cycle. So we spent a considerable effort in acquisitions, working with our partners there to ensure that we had enterprise license agreements in place for the majority of the capabilities that we needed, especially on cloud services and also on network capabilities. So that has brought to bear the ability to then consolidate individual purchases that were going on with the bureaus and at Post into a single ELA, saving a significant amount of money.
Wow, a lot of heavy lifting going on over there at State, and it really is fascinating to see a lot of this capability that's now available in these, we'll call them hybrid clouds, that allow some of this on-prem, off-prem, sort of a mesh kind of capability, which is remarkable, the progress that's been made in that technology space over the last 3 or 4 years, which is giving all of you a lot of options, and it sounds like you guys are really exploiting that. Nick, how about at Snowflake? I know there's a lot of activity going on over there. You see a lot of activity going on across the community, both in the federal sector, in the private sector. It's all about the data, right?
We do. These stories are all fantastic, and they're also very familiar, right? It's the trend that we see across the industry from Snowflake's perspective is we don't typically spend a lot of time talking about the latest CPUs or how much RAM we have in our servers. What we end up talking about is outcomes, right? Mr. Underwood, Mr. Campione being able to downsize the number of data centers their organizations are using, Mr. Ashmore shortening the time it takes to hire somebody into that organization and make an impact, Mr. Havens making things more secure with more secure products and services from his company. These are all things that Snowflake has seen from a very high level. It's the outcomes that IT modernization is responsible for. IT modernization as a construct doesn't have a direct benefit. It's what we use those modern architectures to do in our organizations that drives value. Snowflake's happy to be a part of that architecture across federal and civilian markets.
And it's a great testament to you know, we used to talk on these shows early on about, you know, sort of, I always called it pliers and wires. Now we're talking about outcome, and we're talking about enabling the mission, right? And the IT community has really become the mission enabler, which is, you know, what they've always been, but there's much more of a tight stitch to that now, and you see that across the board, right? When you look at the president's management agenda, right? They talk about, you know, how are we going to help the farmers, right? How are we going to help the American public, et cetera? They're not talking about data center consolidation and getting from 100 to 10. We're talking about, you know, smart cloud type capabilities, which is all about enabling. So very good points. We're going to let you talk about what Okta is first a little bit. So you could just introduce that to the audience of folks that may not know what that is, and then tell us sort of what's going on across the community, because once again, a very important technology that's stitching together a lot of these transformation activities.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on. And the word stitching that you use is actually a great lead-in into what Okta does. So Okta is all about identity and access management. Now, where we look at this is more and more these federal agencies, and everybody on stage is a great example. Not only are they interacting with their internal employees, but they've also now have to pull in the citizens, maybe foreign nationals, foreign governments. So they have identities literally coming from across the world. And how do you pull that in? Right, we've seen a shift where the identity no longer sits within your network, it's global, right? Everybody's got smartphones, everybody's working remote. So how do you start to protect that? From an Okta perspective, I think the foundation of that is moving towards a zero trust architecture. We've seen that be a big hit within the federal government as well as commercial. But then to enable that, right, we have to start looking at supporting those hybrid environments. And what we end up seeing as an outcome of that is being able to start to reduce that legacy footprint that you have in your data centers and start to move that up into the cloud, right? Start to shift those workloads up. Be able to start to build policies around how people are signing into your systems and put context around that. Who's doing it? When? Are they doing it under the right conditions? Should they have that access? And continually monitoring that to make sure that the right person is getting the right level of access.
Super important. I was just out at RSA earlier this week, and one of the CISOs of a Fortune 50 company out there said, you know, there's a lot of hackers out there trying to hack in, but the good hackers don't hack in, they log in. And when you think about that for a minute, you say, yeah, you know, and so non-repudiation, all these other things, really important. And that type of technology you're describing there is a big piece of that. We're going to go to specific programs. Perrin, I'm going to start with you at HHS. Give us an example of a specific program that you all are working on that you'd like to highlight for the audience.
So unfortunately, with the coronavirus, not only are our men and women on the ground working every day to deal with that emergency, but also now phishing attacks to the department using coronavirus as the subject line have been coming through.
Wow.
So recently, we've implemented some very smart technology at our email capture points that has actually defeated that, using some artificial intelligence capabilities that we didn't have prior to this. So the team was able to defeat attack just last week. And we're able to message to our employees quickly, this is what's going on. So phishing, at least for the department, at this time has become a major issue, something we would not have expected a few years ago.
And remarkable, and I know it's got to be all hands on deck over there, and it is frustrating, I guess, to hear that your men and women have to deal with something like that. But fantastic that you've been able to introduce some technology to take that off the table so that they can fight the good fight, so to speak. Ralph, how about at Infoblox? Can you give us an example of a program that you're perhaps working on that you'd like to highlight for the community here?
Certainly. So 6 months ago, a customer reached out. They had a sizing elasticity issue in their network. They had Infoblox in their network. They had employed several other solutions. We all worked well together, but they showed up on a Monday morning and DNS was down. That's a problem. And it's not a problem until it's a problem. So they reached out to all the partners in their ecosystem. We sat down.
DNS is down. This is a major problem,
Yes, sir.
right? All of a
So
sudden, you're not accessing anything.
So we showed up on a Monday. All of our partners showed up. We provided a solution by Friday. And Infoblox was chosen to help the agency move forward. And feedback that was given to us was eye-opening because it wasn't that we, as a team, solved the problem. We solved for the network, right? Previously, we've seen where we used to always solve for capacity, right? I got a red light, how do I turn it green? Okay, I'm good, I'll move on to the next priority. We walked in and we solved for capacity. We solved not for the red light turning green, we solved for the future. The customer saw that in our solution, has deployed that over the course of the last 6 months, and now has one of the more secure, one of the more scalable DNS architectures in the government.
I would imagine that you see that quite a bit, similar types of situations like that, correct?
Yes, and it's a matter of identification and prioritization. It's prevalent across government and civilian and commercial agencies. It's a matter of, do I recognize that and what priority do I put on solving that versus the other instances, the other problems or issues and concerns that I have on my network.
Right, and good to see that an agency was to be able to identify the issue, identify some capability, introduce it into their environment, and get that done relatively quickly. It's back to some of this procurement stuff that you're talking about, where you're able to actually modernize the way to acquire goods and services. And I know there's been a lot of activity around hiring too, as far as, rapid ways to do hiring, which is important. Well, we're going to take a quick break before, and then we'll circle back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network. With me on today's show are Rocky Campione with Department of Energy, Perrin Ashmore with Health and Human Services, Ralph Havens with Infoblox, Earl Underwood with Department of State, Nicholas Speece with Snowflakes, and Habib Harani with Okta. We're talking about IT modernization. We were talking about specific programs. Rocky, how about at Energy? Can you give us a specific program that you'd like to highlight as far as your IT modernization journey?
Absolutely. I wanted to briefly touch on one that's done, which was moving off analog phone lines to VoIP. That kind of finished up in FY19. That was a completed modernization. But then there's one that's ongoing now too, and that's, I talked about it earlier, moving from our on-premises environment up into the cloud. So we started this in FY19 with migration readiness assessments to understand what we had, what our systems look like, what the data look like, how can we optimize. We've moved about 30% of them up into the cloud already, into AWS and then to Microsoft Azure Gov. And what we're excited about is we're already seeing the benefits of modernization. Was mentioned earlier, you don't modernize, modernization isn't the reason you do it. You do it because it gives you more capabilities. So once we modernize, once we're in a cloud environment, we have an ability to bring in innovation. And with our AI office and a lot of what we're doing in AI, once we get to that cloud environment, we have those new capabilities and new services that the cloud vendors are bringing to bear rapidly in order to solve mission problems. So we're really proud of not just the VoIP, which is we've completed, but we're really proud of, as we move into cloud environments, the innovation that we enable for the rest of the department.
Right, and a lot of this journey was about, can we reduce our costs and reliability, but all of a sudden, that there's an incredible amount of functionality that you're getting when you're starting to embark in these different types of technologies and these journeys. Habib, how about at Okta? Can you give us an example of some programs out there that, a specific one that perhaps you all have been working on that you'd like to highlight?
Sure, and I'll give you two if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because the way Okta looks at the identity is there's the internal, so the workforce of the agencies that are on the panel, and then there's the external, the citizens that they may be interfacing with. So I'll pick on parent first, and with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the quality payment program went under a huge modernization. And what we ended up doing is modernizing not only how the users signed into it, but we were able to build in identity proofing as part of the registration process to make sure that it's the right person signing in, giving them secure access to the systems. And now we have somewhere in the realm of, I want to say 5 million identities for CMS and the quality payment program. And Okta is the front door to all of that and making sure that the right person gets paid out for the work they've done. When we look at the internal use cases, so flipping the coin real quick, I'll pick on Rocky and Energy, and we have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And they had to undergo a modernization effort where they've been a very cloud-first program within Energy. So now they started bringing in some more SaaS applications, more modern applications, and they had to start supporting essentially modern authentication protocols, which they really didn't in the past. So they procured Okta in an effort to start to build this platform that gave them essentially the security they needed to make sure that someone that works for SPR that's out in the oil fields has the same level of security as someone working for SPR HQ and being able to still access the appropriate applications under the right conditions. So.
Yeah, it's amazing that once you start to broaden your computing footprint, whether it's a SaaS, cloud type play, a hybrid play, or a full cloud play, all of a sudden this identity issue becomes even more complex and super important because you're not inside your walls anymore, right? So you really have to have some fantastic technology and modern technology to enable that and make sure that you're doing it properly. Nick, how about well, hang on. Let's go over to Earl at State. Give us an example. You touched on a lot of different activities there. Give us an example of one program that you'd like to highlight for the audience.
So historically at State, we managed all of our email, document management, SharePoint, et cetera, on-prem, and we had these large infrastructures. 2 years ago, we went down a path of engaging with Microsoft and migrating to Office 365. So over the last 2 years, we've migrated over 107,000 users from an on-prem Exchange infrastructure distributed around the world with Exchange servers sitting at Post into Office 365. So now all of their email is there. We also had very large implementations of SharePoint on-prem for our unclassified environment, over 40,000 sites. We've migrated 100% of that into the cloud. And then as a part of that also user file storage, which again was distributed at Post and around our data centers, we have migrated over 50% of that information out into OneDrive in the Microsoft Cloud. What this does is that brings all of that information together for a user, so when I'm looking for things that I need to act upon today, I no longer have to go to multiple data stores to find that information. I can, from the O365 console, single search, be able to see all of my information. So it's really improved the usability of the data for the customer because now they have their information in a single data store.
Sure, I'm sure it's reduced your complexity as far as how you're managing, et cetera. I can't imagine having gone through a micro version of that, having to deal with that on a global scale, now migrating that into the cloud. Your complexity goes down, functionality, as you're pointing out here goes way up. I'm sure that every state employee is really enjoying that capability, and so is the IRM organization, right?
Absolutely.
Nick, now over to you. Tell us about a program that you're working on, across maybe one of these agencies that you'd like to point out for the audience.
Yep, happy to.
Yeah.
The solution that we targeted is actually very similar to one of the things that Okta is very good at protecting against. In the authentication world, it's impossible for an individual to authenticate from two states that are on opposite sides of the country at the same time. It wouldn't be possible to be in Florida and California. In Snowflake's world, we took that same problem set and applied that to certain billing operations where someone would try to collect a fund or bill something from Florida or California or New York all in the same exact time at the same exact day, which obviously would be impossible. And in today's constructs, those agencies or those different organizations may not be able to see each other's data and audit that to ensure that that transaction gets stopped before it happens. It's often a clawback activity, which takes time, takes effort, costs money, and often is self-defeating. In the Snowflake world with private exchanges, with cross-cloud collaboration, whether you're in Azure, Microsoft clouds, or if you're over in AWS or Google Cloud, that data can be shared and collaborated on in Snowflake and allows that transaction to be blocked in the future instead of just audited and recollected, which is what we do today.
Wow, that's a sophisticated solution to a very complex problem, right?
It is, and it affects every organization, every agency in the government, I believe.
100%. Well, I like to talk about, with all of this early adoption going on, I always like to give you all an opportunity to share with the audience lessons learned. And those could be lessons learned on the plus side, lessons learned on the minus side. Perrin, I'm going to start with you. You all are involved in a lot of different activity. And for the sharing audience here, tell us about some lessons learned that you're discovering that you'd like to offer.
Well, Luke, hearing the conversation, what's different, and I've been doing this a long time. I may look young, but I started programming back in 1979. But what these new solutions allow one to do is move incrementally, which is a great thing. That means that in a department like ours, it's very federated with some very significant legacy technology that is imperative that it stays up. We can put in these new solutions and move at a rate and pace that makes sense for us. And that's what I would say is our biggest lesson learned. Long ago, you would think you would have to move the entire enterprise at one time. That's completely changed. You can now move when it makes sense and when the time is right and when you're ready, when the money's there, when the people are there. And so that's the biggest game changer. And the other thing that I would say, and Jose Arrieta and I say consistently, is once you make an investment in any of these solutions, you must go all in. Maximize your utilization of that investment. Don't try to buy best of breed of everything. Master the platforms that you've brought forward and then determine what's lacking. Don't go out and try to buy one off of everything. You will destroy the user experience. And that's when the users come at you, as Rocky will attest, is when their computers boot up, slowly. Or for example, a certain feature doesn't fire off when you would expect it to fire off consistently because it's conflicted with some other product we've deployed. So those are some of the lessons that we've learned.
Yeah, and it's making sure that some of these capabilities aren't competing with each other,
Exactly.
right? And so you can get consistent on that user experience is definitely super important. Habib, how about at Okta? I'm sure you've seen some lessons learned as you're deploying these capabilities, pluses and minuses. And I always like to give the positives too, that here was a great experience and it was because of this versus, hey, watch out for that. So, but I'll leave that one up to you. Maybe one of both if you have them.
No pressure, right?
Yeah.
What we're starting to see is there is that move to best in breed, like Perrin says, and they're being very deliberate in the selection of the product. Because as part of that, what they're looking for is to be future-proof, to be resilient, right? When you start to deprecate data centers, there's a cost return to that. But the flip side to that is you lose some control over that software, so you want to make sure that it's built in a way that 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, you're not pigeonholed into something that isn't adapting to the world around it. Because the truth is, IT moves so fast that there is no standing still. Some of the other things that we've seen are that hybrid scenario and that migration path. Candidly, all these agencies are way too big to do a rip and replace. That is by far the exception, and even then, it's probably an exception to the exception's exception. So being able to provide a solution that gives them that path where we can support that hybrid environment where they are today and give them that path to the future, we see that as a recurring theme as well.
Right, and I think it's a delicate balance. I think the folks that tried the rip and replace model have been up here talking about the lessons learned in regards to how that doesn't work. But again, with the introduction of all this new technology, a lot easier to do sort of this incremental step as you were describing. Earl, how about at state? I'm sure you have a lot of lessons learned there that you'd like to, perhaps one or two that you'd like to offer to the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say that from a technology perspective, while difficult, that's actually the easiest part of the transition. It's the cultural change that you have to put into play for your users. Historically, our users are used to being on an operating system or a productivity suite for 4, 5, 6 years at a time. Now that we've migrated out to the cloud for many of our capabilities, they're getting changes weekly, sometimes daily, on how their system interacts with their email, with SharePoint, with their workflows. So being able to quickly provide those users with, number one, communication that the change is coming, and education on what that change is and how best to use that. And if you look at it from the IT perspective, as I mentioned, we're migrating all of this data out of Post overseas and back into either the enterprise data center out to the cloud. So I have IT specialists that are sitting at Post that are used to racking and stacking servers, patching operating systems, installing software. They're no longer doing that. So now we have to educate them and bring them into a new philosophy of they need to be out with the business and helping the customer adapt to the new capabilities very quickly, because we want them to get the full utilization of the capabilities. So those are the things that we've really learned, that technology is easy, it's the change in the organization, and then change in the organization also, because we're changing how we're conducting business, there's going to be some organizational structure changes that will have to occur. So we're looking at how we can do that in the best manner to ensure that we're providing a quality service and not having folks go through multiple tiers of support when they need support, when it's really all collaborative and in the same cloud.
Right, really two different dynamics of one, your own employees getting their cheese moved, so to speak, right? Because they're now not racking and stacking, they're off doing another capability, but this adoption for every State Department employee using this new technology and then becoming sort of an ambassador of that. Fascinating to hear that. Ralph, how about at InfoBlocks? I'm sure you've got some examples of some lessons learned there.
Certainly, some lessons learned for InfoBlocks and our customers as they proceed with modernization. One is visibility, the understanding that I can't secure what I can't see. It's remarkable how networks have grown over the last 20, 30, 40 years and what's not known about our networks. Scale, I mentioned earlier, solving for capacity. Don't solve for today, but solve for tomorrow, solve for that scalability and integration. And one that I think InfoBlocks has undertaken, and it's not talked about enough, is the ecosystem play. Ecosystem, what that means to us is our technology alliances and working together with our partners and understanding we're not all competitive, we're all collaborative really at our core and want to solve the agency's problems. So some of our best successes, some of our best customer successes have been pulling us all in together, not separate, and understanding that holistic approach to solving for X on the network, using that best in class, using the best of what every vendor has to bring to bear.
Right, and anytime you can make that seamless and sort of a low dose on the operators, on the customers, I think certainly they would all appreciate it. Rocky, how about at Energy? I'm sure you've got some lessons learned out there as you're going on this journey.
Every day. And hopefully not the same one every other day. But it's I'm at the end, so I might repeat a lot of what we've talked about. But communication, communicate. You need to communicate why are you doing it. It might not always be about cost savings. It could be cost savings. It could be cost savings. It could be we want new capabilities. It could be our physical infrastructure is falling down around us, so it's a more safer and secure environment. It could be a lot of different reasons, but everybody needs to understand why. Because if you modernize and your CFO thinks you're modernizing to save money and you don't, you failed. If you modernize and you're just moving out of a falling data center into a more stable cloud environment, but you're not changing the underlying application, and your users think they're going to get something new and fresh and exciting, and they don't, you failed.
Sure.
So you've got to communicate so that people understand why you're doing it. And you also have to communicate what's changing. How do they access it? May that change? Because change is scary, right? And I mean, it's everybody knows it. There's books written about it. I think we mentioned Who Moved My Cheese earlier. There's a lot of business books about change, but you have to tell people what's changing so that they know and they can and you've set expectations appropriately. And when you don't do it, from an IT perspective, we can say, hey, we moved all your email, it's great. And they say, yeah, but I can't save the file anymore. Or, how I used to send my email, it doesn't look the same, so I don't like how it looks. And it could be a failure because you didn't communicate what's changing. You didn't communicate why. So the big lesson learned is make sure everybody has a common understanding of why you're doing modernization, so that they don't have a different expectation at the end than what you went in with.
Setting those expectations, what's going to happen, and in some cases, what's not going to happen. Nick, how about at Snowflake? Give us an example of a lesson learned there.
Yeah, absolutely. I have two. The first is I can't agree any more with Mr. Underwood or Mr. Campione. The culture is the most prominent feature and the biggest requirement that any agency has to meet in IT modernization. Getting buy-in into the changes that you're making to a core infrastructure and core way of doing business in any organization is key. And getting that buy-in a lot of times is very difficult. My favorite quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It goes across every organization ever on the planet. The core responsibility there for us as designing these systems is how are my folks going to use that system? How can it make us more efficient? And that's what we have to get to. And on the other side, I would say maximize the value you get from commercial products and build that top value add layer yourselves in that open source technology, in your own tools, in your own algorithms, but maximize the value you can get from commercially available products today.
Set a baseline and then do what you need to do per agency. It's a fascinating subject here. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network. With me on today's show are Rocky Campione, Department of Energy, Perrin Ashmore with Health and Human Services, Ralph Havens with Infoblox, Earl Underwood with the Department of State, Nicholas Spiess with Snowflake, and Habib Hourani with Okta. We're talking about IT modernizations. We're going to talk about priorities. Earl, let's start with you at State. Let's talk about priorities for this year. We're just into 2020. What do you got on the deck for this year?
Thanks, Luke. So while us technologists really love to play with the technology and get all the new whiz-bang stuff, we really have to look at the user. So our CIO has told us that he wants us to focus on the field first. So as we're rolling these technologies, making sure that we're putting those capabilities into the hands of the users, and we're actually getting their feedback very quickly using Agile to make sure that what we're delivering is actually meeting their needs. As a part of that, we have a program underway to consolidate our identities using Okta to make sure that instead of users having to have multiple accounts in multiple systems, they have one single access store that has not only their access rights, but also the authentication, so that it's a seamless integration between different systems. Secondly, one of the things that we're doing is we have an enterprise ELA with ServiceNow. Our legacy ITSM solution that manages all of our IT assets as well as our service requests and incidents is being updated to ServiceNow in the cloud. And so we have a significant focus on rolling that out. We're going to roll that out again using Agile methodologies so they get minimal viable product out to the customers very quickly. As a part of that, what we're hoping to also give the customers is a lot of self-service capabilities so that they no longer have to submit a ticket and wait on a human to respond, that it's already automated and they can get the services they need near real time.
Fantastic. A lot of simplification there going on, and a lot of enablement with your employees. Perrin, how about at HHS? Top priority for you this year?
So it's all about saving money and returning money to the mission.
Okay.
So we are embarking upon work with our major vendors. We're going through our neural network results. We've identified 3 major targets for this year to close out with either enterprise agreements, like Earl was discussing, or new forms of a blanket purchase agreement with those vendors. But we are going to drive that cost out, try to do things as a department, taking our department needs to the vendor community and trying to drive out costs. And for the vendor community, try to drive down their administrative cost, because now we're hoping to manage through a single vehicle versus hundreds of vehicles.
Right.
The other thing that will begin in the summer is our network transition to the new GSA vehicle. So that's currently underway, but again, for a department as spread out as we are, it's a major transition effort that will impact every component of the department. It could last up to 18, 20 months to get this done, but that is a multi-million-dollar effort that will start this summer. Those discussions are underway now with the vendor communities. And those are the 2 major ones that I see. And there, of course, there are more, but those are the big ones.
Of course, a lot on the deck there, and I would imagine that second one, once done, will save a lot of money as well, perhaps, and that's fantastic. Big effort there. Rocky, how about at Energy? What's the top priority for you this year?
Top priority is getting out of on-premises data centers, moving to the cloud, and deploying multiple cloud environments. So not just kind of a Microsoft Azure government, but the Azure commercial, AWS government and commercial, getting Google environment stood up, and not just stood up, but ATO'd, have governance structures around it. And the reason is when we have that environment, and there are other clouds too.
Sure.
Those are kind of going to be the first ones that we hit. Once we set that up, we've set a platform for innovation for the rest of the department, because we've stood up these capabilities, and the department just has to come in with the application on top and say, here's the application that impacts my mission, because we have a multiple modern, innovative cloud environments that can meet different security needs, can meet different capability needs, and we think that that'll really have a positive impact on the mission. So that's everything we're doing, whether it's from an enterprise architecture perspective, looking at, so that we can help identify what's better, what application works better in which cloud. On our IT operations side, making sure we have the bandwidth for it, making sure that we've migrated to them, and making sure we've set them up in a secure fashion.
Really laying that foundation down.
Foundational.
Right,
Yep.
so that every one of those operating components can be successful, all the labs, et cetera, in that multi-cloud kind of environment. And being able to manage that is another dynamic that I'm sure you're well on your way.
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna bring it back down to the end, and we're gonna start with you, Habib. And we're going to ask you to paint a picture of, what does the future look like as you guys are, in the petri dish developing things, and you're looking at sort of what's going on across the community. What does that look like out, just 2 or 3 years, say?
Yeah. So one of the big focuses for us, and I think Earl hit it on the head, is the end user experience, because change is hard. So there's a big push within Okta to try to make and bring to the government that commercial end user experience that you do every day when you go to the bank or you go to any other application, and be able to have the federal government be as smooth, as friction-free, and as secure as we're seeing on the enterprise side. So internally for us, that means focusing on higher security accreditations, right? Moving into FedRAMP High, making sure that we secure IL4, IL5, so that we can start to extend our services to more agencies. I think the other thing we're looking at, to Perrin's point about getting the most out of the vendors that you're choosing, is we have a big focus on automations and being able to leverage Okta as that identity store the way state is using us today, and having that central repository, but then being able to extend that to all the applications that you're pulling in, whether it's a new cloud app or it's a new on-prem app that you have to continue to support, to Rocky's point, but being able to have that one vendor do a really good job and get you the most bang for your buck. So you're not trying to pick out a bunch of different little applications to try to fill in some of these
Super
gaps.
important, because as things simplify, they get more complex in a different kind of way. And so I'm glad to see that you all are thinking about that and putting capability in place to address that. Nick, how about at Snowflake? What's the future look like?
So Snowflake's very proud of our history of helping our customers and partners in government be more data-driven in their decision-making. I think in the next couple of years, we'll see more of a drive towards interagency collaboration, some secure data collaboration and sharing. Snowflake as a platform is a phenomenal place for that to occur and to enable that. So our drive over the next few years is to really push that platform and help our government partners start to collaborate between agencies.
Wow, fantastic. Earl, if I'm a diplomat, I got my first new post out in, name the country, what's that experience going to look like in 2 or 3 years? What's the future hold for the State Department over the next 2 to 3 years?
So we have several things that we're working on. Number one is mobility, trying to ensure that our diplomats are able to work no matter whether they're sitting at the desk, they're traveling, commuting to and from work, or they're off-site working with some of their NGOs or other partners. So we got a big focus on ensuring that not only do they have cell phone access to their data, but full access through laptops and other methods. As a part of that, we need to update our networks. State has been a little behind the curve on enabling Wi-Fi capabilities. So within our embassies overseas and all our domestic facilities, we're installing Wi-Fi that can be used for unclass processing of our information. That then allows the users to move from desk to conference room to cafeteria with their device and have a seamless interaction with their information, continue up on their email, continue editing the document that they're working on. So we're looking at that very hard. IoT, we have lots of devices in all of these facilities that are communicating what's going on within the building, also communicating what's going on with entry and exit points, getting all of that information off of disparate networks and into a consolidated environment so that we can take AI and machine learning and use that to help manage the facilities, manage access, identify when there's an issue with individuals entering, identify issues with heating, plumbing, et cetera. So a lot of big focus on that. And then finally, robotic automation. As we put more and more of this information into these large data sets, how can we data mine that using the knowledge that we have there to help the customer through bots and other things so that we can quickly get them to the answers that they're looking for.
And really start to, enable a new functionality there. And I would imagine with the IoT stuff, it's not only being able to do some AI and ML on that, but also you're probably securing that in a much better environment, right, as you transition that over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Ralph, how about at Infoblox? I mean, what's, as you all are right smack in the middle of this transformation, if you will, what are you all thinking about in regards to, out 2 or 3 years in respect to, the community?
For Infoblox, we're working to continue to improve visibility, network security, and automation of those core network services, what we've done for the last 20 years. We're also adding improved threat intelligence and understanding the bad actors, helping customers commercially and federally. We see thousands of threat indicators a day. How do I discern quickly which one matters? We're working to provide a connectedness frontline to data center. As the networks shrink and evolve, how do I maintain that visibility and that security from the front line to the data center? And we're working to provide a broader access to all of these services, cloud or on-prem.
Interesting dynamic there in regards to sort of closing that loop from one end to the other, right? Bringing that together and stitching it is super important, and I'm glad to see that you guys are focusing a lot of attention on that. Perrin, how about at HHS? What does the future look like? You got a lot of things going on over there right now, a whole bunch of activity going on in your operating components.
I think the biggest thing you'll see in the next couple of years is our ability to share data with our partners, whether they're inside the government or outside the government. You'll see us make great strides in that work. The Ed Simcox and his team have set a platform baseline. Arietta has now inherited that, and you'll see us work faster and smarter to complete electronically user data sharing agreements, using the cloud to spin up environments so that researchers can have the data, we can protect it. The other thing that I would say that we're looking for our software applications vendor community to do a job of thinking about accessibility before we get the product. It is imperative that the community who delivers to the federal government starts thinking about accessibility, security, and privacy before they hand a product to the government. And that today, what we find ourselves doing is building that in after we get the product. So we think in 2 or 3 years, that should be done with. We should be getting products that we can immediately put in place and that our entire community can take use of from the day we launch it, not wait until we've remediated certain issues to make it more accessible, for example.
Right, go through that testing program and find out that this is not really 508 compliant, that you have to go through a series of steps to be able to use that. And you've got a community that is trying to access your services there that needs that kind of capability. Everybody needs that kind of, no matter what agency it is.
That's correct.
I would imagine. So on that open data piece of that, so you're saying that you're going to do that, and you'll see a much open, even more than it is today in regards to not only your partners in the sort of medical community, but it sounds like out to the general public?
To the general public.
Yeah.
We think we can make that step, and Ed Simcox's team has kind of laid that foundation for us and given us a vision. We'll start with our immediate communities of interest, but we think at some point, yes, in 2 or 3 years that we'll start to be able to do that.
That's fantastic and fascinating. I can't imagine some of the capability that'll happen once you unlock a lot of that information. Rocky, how about at Energy? A lot of activity going on over there. What does the future look like over the course of 2 or 3 years? You'll have your data centers consolidated, right? You'll have some of that out of the way. What's it going to look like out there 3 years from now?
Well, first I wanted to take a moment and talk about whatever we do in the future is based on the work that's been done in the past. And we were at the Federal CIO Council meeting yesterday, and it was Joe Klemovich, his last CIO Council meeting as he leaves federal service.
40 years of federal
40 years of federal
Incredible,
service.
yeah.
Renee Wynn at NASA's moving on soon. I think that's
Both
been
have
announced.
been on the show here.
Yeah, and really what we do, even at a specific agency, when you look at the community as a whole, CIOs as a whole, as we share information, as one of us does something great and shares it, we can all, I'm already going to talk to Perrin and say, what did you do with neural networks? We can feed off each other. So a lot of what our capabilities are today are based off of the great work that our predecessors have across the IT community and the federal government.
We stand on the back of the giants, right?
But you were asking about energy too, so thank you for letting me say that about some of the CIOs that are leaving. But I also want to talk about what does it look like at Energy, and I talked about creating a platform for innovation. So I think in the next 2 to 5 years, because we'll have created that platform, we'll really allow our mission offices to really benefit from that. You can't have a meeting at the Department of Energy and not talk about AI, artificial intelligence right now.
Sure.
We stood up a brand new office for it. We have 600 AI projects going on across the complex. And by creating that platform, we will allow for new innovations, not just in AI, but across the board, which will really help impact the mission. So what do I see in the next 2 to 5 years? I see a lot of innovation, a lot of really smart people doing things that I can't even think about today. And we just want to make sure we set that table for them and let them go forward.
Right, and I would imagine that once you enable all of this computing capability to happen across those multiple networks, you're going to put a lot of computing capability in the hands of all these scientists, et cetera, and I can't imagine that that's going to be what the future is going to hold in that regard.
I can't either. I just need to make sure I give them the platform to do it.
Give them the platform to do it, make sure it's secure, make sure it's reliable, et cetera.
Absolutely.
We'll do a quick turbo round here. I like doing this. I'm going to start with you, Perrin. And this one is really on sort of the we'll call them the barriers, right? You know, where's the, as you look at the capabilities that you're trying to implement today and what you're doing in the future, is it money, is it culture, is it hiring, is it, you know, acquisitions, all of the above, that kind of thing. So what would you consider sort of, you know, sort of your top area that you're trying to address to make sure you can go?
So I think it's what Rocky pointed out, and that is championing other people's work. We've heard about some work being done at Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. We at the department need to embrace that work and figure out how to celebrate it and how to partner with our divisions to take the work farther. And today what we're finding as a barrier is that everyone wants to stand up their own individual platform or solution. And so that presents both a financial risk and acquisition risk. So we need to just find better ways to do that. And I think under Jose's leadership, we've been building those bridges to our divisions where we're beginning to trust one another. We're beginning to understand that our needs are similar, and where we can work together, we will, because it's both, it gets you both speed and it gets you a cost savings. So it's convincing people that it's okay to do work that way.
Well, I think you've capsulized what the whole community is thinking. And we're going to wrap it up here. I'd like to thank today's guests for taking their time out of their busy schedules to join us for the program. I'd like to thank the sponsors here, for which we don't have a show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Radio that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience, for tuning in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.